My name is Taryn. I'm 32 years old, and I wasn't even invited to my own parents' 40th anniversary. Let that sink in for a moment. My own parents. The people who brought me into this world, who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who I spent 3 decades trying to please, trying to make proud, trying to be good enough for. They didn't invite me to celebrate one of the most important milestones of their lives. And you want to know what makes it worse? My mom looked me right in the eye, well, through the phone actually, and she told me it was just going to be a small family dinner. Nothing big, she said, just intimate. Close family only, honey. That's what she called me. Honey. Like the lie would taste sweeter with a pet name attached to it. But when I saw the pictures online, when I was scrolling through my feed on a random Wednesday night with a glass of wine in my hand, wearing my pajamas, thinking about how my parents were probably having a nice quiet dinner somewhere, and then I saw it. The ballroom. The enormous glittering ballroom with chandelier lighting and floral arrangements that probably cost more than my rent. The decorations that clearly took weeks to plan. The smiling faces of what looked like over 100 people, all dressed in their finest, all raising their glasses to celebrate my parents' love story. And there, right in the center of one photo, was my younger sister Melanie, standing at a microphone, mid-toast, looking radiant and perfect like she always does, saying God knows what about our wonderful parents. I felt like my heart had been ripped straight out of my chest. Actually, no, that's not accurate. It felt worse than that. It felt like my heart was still there, still beating, but someone had wrapped barbed wire around it and was slowly, methodically tightening it with each new photo I scrolled past. So I sent them a gift that made the entire room go silent, a gift that finally made them see me. And I'm going to tell you everything about it, because this story, this pain, it needs to be heard. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been the forgotten one, the one who tries and never measures up, then this is for you too. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from, because this one hurts. This one cuts deep, but sometimes the deepest cuts are the ones that finally let the poison out. I need you to understand something before I tell you what I did. I need you to understand that this wasn't a sudden thing. This wasn't me overreacting to one incident. This was 32 years in the making. 32 years of being the daughter who wasn't quite right, who didn't quite fit, who didn't shine bright enough to deserve their attention. I grew up in a house where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned, and where I was, constantly, endlessly competing with a standard I could never reach. That standard had a name. Melanie. My sister is 2 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she was golden. I remember being 4 years old, standing next to her crib, looking down at this tiny baby, and my mother cooing about how perfect she was, how beautiful, how blessed they were. And I remember thinking, even at 4 years old, that maybe now I could be a good, big sister. Maybe that could be my thing. Maybe that could make them proud of me. I tried. God, I tried so hard. But nothing I did was ever enough. When I brought home A's on my report card, they'd remind me that school came easily to me, so it wasn't really an achievement, not like when Melanie tried hard at something. When I made the soccer team, they'd show up late to games, or not at all, because they were at Melanie's dance recitals. When I got into college, a good college, they said it was expected. When Melanie got into the same college 2 years later with lower grades, they threw her a party. I learned early on that some children are celebrated for existing, and others have to justify taking up space. I was the latter. And the thing about being that child is that you start to internalize it. You start to believe that maybe they're right. Maybe you're just not special enough. Maybe you need to try harder, be better, achieve more. So that's what I did. I became an overachiever. I graduated with honors. I got a good job. I bought my own apartment. I sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts and called every week like a dutiful daughter. I showed up to every family event I was invited to, always on time, always with a smile, always hoping that this would be the time they'd finally see me, really see me, and realize that I was worthy of their love too. But it never happened. At Thanksgiving dinners, they'd ask Melanie about her life, her job, her boyfriend, and I'd sit there answering questions with polite, one-word responses before the conversation shifted back to her. At Christmas, Melanie's gifts would be thoughtful and personalized, things she'd mention wanting, and mine would be generic, things bought last minute, things that made it clear they didn't really know me at all. One year, I got a cookbook. I'd been a vegetarian for 5 years at that point and had mentioned it countless times, but the cookbook was all about cooking beef, little things like that, paper cuts, over and over. Until you're bleeding from 1,000 tiny wounds and nobody can see the damage because there's no single big injury to point to. My birthday was always the worst. Melanie's birthday was an event. Dinner at nice restaurants, thoughtful gifts, social media posts from my parents about how blessed they were to have such an amazing daughter. My birthday? A text message if I was lucky. One year they forgot entirely. I waited all day for a call that never came. The next day my mom called about something completely unrelated, and when I mentioned that she'd missed my birthday, she laughed. Actually laughed. She said, "Oh honey, you know I'm terrible with dates. You're old enough now that birthdays aren't really a big deal anyway, right?" I was 27. Melanie was 25 and had just had a surprise party thrown for her the month before. Then there was my college graduation. I was the first person in our family to graduate with a master's degree. I worked full-time while going to school at night. It took me 3 years and I barely slept, and I was so proud when I finally finished. I sent them the invitation to the ceremony months in advance. They said they'd be there. I even reserved them good seats. The day of graduation, I kept looking for them in the crowd while we were lining up. I kept checking my phone. My mom finally texted me 2 hours before the ceremony. "Melanie's going through a hard breakup and needs us. I know you'll understand. Congratulations, sweetie." With a balloon emoji. Like that made it better. Like a tiny digital balloon could fill the space where they should have been sitting. I walked across that stage, and when they called my name, I looked out at the audience and saw empty seats where my parents should have been cheering. I smiled for the camera anyway. I'd gotten good at pretending everything was fine. The voicemails were probably the worst though. My mom had this way of saying things when she was frustrated. Things she probably thought I'd forget, or maybe she didn't care if I remembered. When I changed careers to something I was passionate about but that paid less, she left me a voicemail. I'd missed her call and she didn't realize she was still recording, or maybe she did and just didn't care. She's always been a disappointment. I heard her say to someone in the background, probably my dad, "Never thinks about stability, not like Melanie. Melanie has her head on straight." I saved that voicemail. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted to be able to remind myself that I wasn't making it up, that the coldness I felt from them was real. There were so many moments like that. So many times I told myself that next time would be different. Next time they'd show up. Next time they'd be proud. Next time I'd be enough. But next time never came, and slowly, so slowly, I barely noticed it happening, I started to shrink myself around them. I stopped sharing my achievements because they'd be dismissed. I stopped asking them to come to things because the rejection hurt too much. I stopped expecting anything from them at all. And then I felt guilty for pulling away, so I'd try again, reach out again, hope again. It was a cycle that left me dizzy and exhausted and feeling crazy because on the surface, to anyone looking from the outside, they were perfectly nice to me. They weren't abusive. They didn't yell or hit. They just didn't care. And somehow that indifference was harder to explain, harder to justify my pain over, than outright cruelty would have been. Then came the phone call about the anniversary. I should have known something was off by how brief it was. My mom called on a Tuesday evening. "Hi, honey," she said, and I could hear the TV in the background like she was multitasking. "I wanted to let you know that for our anniversary, we're just doing a small family dinner, nothing big. Just keeping it intimate, you know?" And I said, "Okay, that sounds nice." And she said, "Right. So we'll do something small and celebrate with close family. I'll call you after and tell you about it." And I stopped. I remember stopping in the middle of folding laundry and saying, "Wait, am I not invited?" And she laughed that same dismissive laugh and said, "Oh, Taryn, it's really just for the people who've been there for the important moments. Don't take it personally. We'll have dinner sometime soon, just the two of us." Just the two of us. Like that was some kind of consolation prize. Like excluding me from a major family event could be smoothed over with a promise of an obligatory one-on-one meal that would probably never happen anyway. I should have been angry right then. I should have said something. But I just said okay, because that's what I always did. I absorbed the hurt, swallowed it down, made myself smaller, and said okay. We hung up and I stood there in my apartment surrounded by half-folded laundry and I felt numb. Not sad yet, just numb. Like my brain couldn't quite process what had just happened. My parents were having an anniversary party and I wasn't invited because I wasn't someone who'd been there for the important moments. Me, their daughter. The one who'd spent 32 years trying desperately to be there, to matter, to be seen. Not important enough. A few days passed and I almost convinced myself it was fine. Maybe it really would be just a small thing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was for the best and I could start creating some healthy distance. I was working late at the office when my coworker Jennifer came over to my desk with her phone in her hand and this weird expression on her face. "Hey," she said carefully, like she was approaching a scared animal. "I think you should see this." She handed me her phone and I looked at the screen. It was Instagram. A post from one of my cousins who I barely kept in touch with. The caption said something like, "Beautiful night celebrating beautiful love," with a million heart emojis. But it was the photo that made my blood run cold. It was a ballroom. A massive, gorgeous ballroom with round tables covered in ivory linens and elaborate centerpieces with roses and candles. String lights were draped across the ceiling. There was a dance floor. A live band set up on a stage. I scrolled to the next photo. More guests, all dressed in formal wear, suits, and cocktail dresses. I scrolled again. My parents standing in front of a backdrop that said, 40 years of love in gold letters, surrounded by what looked like 50 or more people. I scrolled again. Melanie, my perfect sister, standing at a microphone with a champagne glass raised, mid-speech, tears in her eyes, clearly giving some heartfelt toast. Everyone was looking at her with these warm, loving expressions. The next photo showed the whole room. I counted the tables. 12 tables. If each sat 8 to 10 people, that was over 100 guests. Over 100 people at my parents' small family dinner. Jennifer was saying something, but I couldn't hear her over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I scrolled back through the photos, zooming in on faces, recognizing relatives, family friends, neighbors, people from their church, people I'd known my entire life, all there, all celebrating, all aware of this event that I'd been told didn't exist, not the way it actually existed. I clicked on the location tag. The Grand View Ballroom. I looked it up on my phone with shaking hands. The venue's website showed pricing. This room cost thousands of dollars to rent. This wasn't a last-minute decision. This was planned. Months of planning probably. Invitations sent out. RSVPs collected. A venue booked. Catering arranged. A band hired. And through all of it, all those weeks and months of planning, not once did my parents think to include me. Not once did they reconsider their decision. They actively chose to exclude me and then lied to my face about it. I handed Jennifer her phone back and I could feel my hands trembling. She asked if I was okay and I heard myself say, "Yes, I'm fine," in this voice that didn't sound like mine. I packed up my stuff and left work early. I drove home and I don't remember the drive at all. I just remember suddenly being in my apartment, sitting on my couch in the dark, scrolling through social media looking for more photos. And there were so many, different people posting from different angles. Videos of the first dance, photos of the cake cutting, clips of speeches. And in every single one, everyone looked so happy, so joyful. Like this was a perfect, beautiful celebration of love and family. And I wasn't in a single photo because I wasn't there. I wasn't even a footnote. I wasn't mentioned. I was erased. That's when I started crying. Not sad crying. Angry crying. The kind of crying where your face gets hot and your chest feels tight and you can't catch your breath. I called my sister. I don't know what I expected. Maybe for her to answer and explain that there'd been some mistake, some miscommunication. But it went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted her. I saw the photos. How could you not tell me? 3 dots appeared like she was typing, then disappeared. Then nothing. She read it and didn't respond. My own sister, who I'd protected and defended, and tried to have a relationship with despite everything, couldn't even give me the courtesy of a response. I looked around my apartment at all the family photos I'd kept on display. Me and my parents at my high school graduation. One of the few events they'd attended. Me and Melanie as kids. Extended family photos from holidays. And I realized I was the only one holding on to these connections. I was the only one trying. I was the only one who cared. And that realization didn't make me sad anymore. It made me furious. Absolutely, blindingly furious. For 32 years, I'd made excuses for them. I'd blamed myself. I'd tried harder. I'd convinced myself that if I could just be better, do better, achieve more, they'd finally love me the way they loved Melanie. But the truth I'd been avoiding my entire life, was that it was never about me not being good enough. It was about them choosing not to see my worth. They'd decided who I was to them a long time ago, and nothing I did was ever going to change that. I didn't call them. I didn't send an angry text. I didn't post something passive-aggressive on social media. I just sat there in that anger, in that pain, and let it burn through me. And somewhere in the middle of that fire, something shifted. I'd spent my whole life being quiet, being accommodating, absorbing their neglect and pretending it didn't hurt because making waves wasn't what good daughters did. But where had that gotten me? Excluded from my own parents' anniversary party. Lied to. Erased. If I stayed quiet now, nothing would change. They'd never acknowledge what they'd done. They'd never apologize. They'd never even see it as something requiring an apology. To them, I wasn't important enough to include, and that was just a fact, as simple and unchangeable as the weather. But I could make them see me. Maybe not the way I'd always wanted. Maybe not with love and pride. But I could make damn sure they'd never forget me again. If I wasn't invited to be there in person, I'd still make my presence known. They wanted to celebrate 40 years of their perfect family? Fine. I'd show everyone what that family actually looked like from my perspective. I'd give them a gift they'd never forget. I started planning that night. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was calm, methodical, determined. I went through my computer, through old hard drives, through boxes of stuff I'd saved over the years. I found everything. The birthday card they'd signed for my 16th birthday, with just their names. No message, while Melanie's card from that same year had paragraphs about how special and loved she was. Photos from family events where I was literally cropped out or pushed to the edge of the frame. The program from my master's graduation with their names listed in the reserved seating section, seats they never filled. Emails where I'd asked them to come to things and they'd made excuses. Text messages that went unanswered for days or weeks. And then there were the voicemails. I'd saved more than I realized. My mom's voice saying I was a disappointment. My dad's irritated tone when I'd called during a holiday and apparently interrupted something. Can't this wait, Taryn? We're busy with Melanie right now. Like I was an inconvenience. Like my desire to connect with my own father on Christmas was a burden. I sat there listening to these messages, these pieces of evidence I'd unconsciously collected over the years. And I felt validated and heartbroken at the same time. I wasn't crazy. This was real. This neglect, this favoritism, this erasure of me, it was all documented, all real. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm not ashamed either. I created a video, I used editing software I'd learned for work, and I put together a compilation. It started soft, almost sweet. Photos of me as a baby, as a child, smiling at the camera with bright, hopeful eyes. Home video footage of me at birthday parties, at school events, always looking at my parents just off camera, seeking their approval, their attention. Then the tone shifted. Photos where you could see the change in my eyes, the dimming of that hope. Clips of family events where the camera focused on Melanie while I stood in the background. Screenshots of text messages I'd sent that were ignored or answered days later with one-word responses. And then, the voicemails. I included audio of my mother calling me a disappointment, my father saying I was interrupting, a message where my mom complained to someone about how I'd chosen the wrong career and wasn't I just being selfish, thinking about passion instead of practicality. Between each piece of evidence, I added simple text. This is what love looked like for me. This is how it feels to be forgotten. This is the daughter you chose not to see. This is the child who was never enough. I didn't editorialize beyond that. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The final screen just said, "Congratulations on 40 years. With love, your daughter Taryn, the one who wasn't invited." I exported the video, saved it to a USB drive, and then I did something I never thought I'd be capable of. I found out who'd planned the event. It wasn't hard. One of the photos tagged a local event planning company. I called them the next day, used a fake name, and said I was a family member who wanted to add a surprise video tribute to the evening. They were thrilled, so helpful. They told me tributes like this made events so special and meaningful. I told them it was from the daughter who couldn't make it, that I wanted to surprise my parents with a message of love, which wasn't technically a lie. It was from me, the daughter who couldn't make it because I wasn't invited, and it was definitely going to surprise them. I mailed them the USB drive with detailed instructions. Play this after dinner, before the cake cutting. Dim the lights for full impact. Tell the guests it's a special tribute from family who couldn't attend. They confirmed receipt. They confirmed the timing. Everything was set. And then I waited. I waited and felt nothing. Not anxiety, not guilt, not second thoughts, just a strange cold calm. Like I was watching myself from outside my body, observing this person who'd finally had enough, who'd finally decided to stop being silent about her pain. The night of the party came. I knew the schedule because I'd gotten it from the event planner. Cocktail hour at 6, dinner at 7. My video would play around 8:30. I stayed home. I poured myself a glass of wine. I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand and I waited. At 8:40, my phone started buzzing. Text messages, missed calls, all from numbers I recognized. Family members, my sister, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't answer any of them. I just watched them light up my screen, one after another, and I knew. I knew the video had played. I knew they'd all seen it. I knew the truth was finally out in the open. My cousin Emma, who I'd always been close to, was the first one I let through. She called 3 times, and on the 3rd time I answered. "Taryn," she said, and her voice was shaking. "What did you do?" And I said, very calmly, "I sent them an anniversary gift. Did they like it?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she said. The whole room went silent, like, dead silent. Everyone just froze. And I said, "Good." She told me what happened. How the lights had dimmed after dinner and everyone had settled in with their drinks, expecting some sweet montage of my parents' life together. How the screen had lit up with my baby pictures and everyone had smiled. How the mood had shifted as the video progressed. How my mother's voice, calling me a disappointment, had echoed through the ballroom speakers. How people had gasped. How my parents had gone pale. How my father had tried to get up, probably to stop the video, but it was too late. It was already playing, and making a scene would only make it worse. She said my mother sat there with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. My father just stared at the screen with this expression Emma described as devastated. Melanie left the table before the video finished, just got up and walked out. And the guests, all those people who'd been celebrating just moments before, sat in uncomfortable silence. When the video ended and the lights came back up, nobody knew what to do. The energy was gone. People started making excuses to leave early. My parents didn't cut the cake. They didn't do the planned final dance. They just stood there accepting awkward condolences and sympathetic looks from people who just witnessed their private family dysfunction displayed in high definition. Emma asked me if I was okay, and I realized I was smiling. Actually smiling. I told her I was better than I'd been in years. She said she understood why I did it, that she'd noticed the way they treated me, that a lot of people had noticed over the years, but nobody said anything because it wasn't their place. But Taryn, she said, this is going to change everything. You know that, right? And I said yes, I knew. That was the point. The calls kept coming. I didn't answer most of them. My sister left a voicemail, her voice tight with anger. What you did was cruel and selfish, and you've humiliated this entire family. I hope you're happy. I saved that message too. Added it to my collection. My father called from my mother's phone, probably because he knew I wouldn't answer his. Taryn, please. We need to talk about this. This isn't how we raised you. And I almost laughed because that was exactly the problem, wasn't it? The way they raised me. The way they didn't raise me, really. The way they raised Melanie with love and attention, while I raised myself on scraps of approval that never came. I didn't call them back. Not that night, not the next day, not that week. I let them sit with it. I let them feel what it's like to reach out to someone and get nothing back. I let them experience a fraction of the loneliness and rejection they'd given me for 3 decades. And honestly, it felt powerful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't trying to fix things or smooth things over or make myself smaller so they'd be comfortable. I was just existing in my truth, in my pain, and refusing to apologize for either. A letter came about a week later. My mother's handwriting on the envelope, which I recognized from the rare birthday cards I'd received over the years. I almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity won. Inside was 2 pages, front and back, of her tight cursive script. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, and with each line I felt my jaw clench tighter. It wasn't an apology. Not even close. It was an accusation. How could I embarrass them like that? How could I air private family matters in front of all their friends? How could I be so vindictive and cruel? How disappointed they were in my behavior. How I'd always been difficult, but this crossed a line. How I needed to apologize to them and to Melanie for ruining what should have been a beautiful celebration. She mentioned, in one small paragraph near the end, that perhaps we haven't always been perfect parents, but we did our best, and this public humiliation was completely unwarranted. Perhaps they hadn't been perfect. That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I got. No recognition of the years of neglect. No understanding of why I'd done what I did. No reflection on their own behavior. Just anger that I'd made them look bad. Even in her letter about how hurt they were, it was still all about them. Their embarrassment, their pain, their reputation. I was still invisible, even in my rebellion. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I sat down with a cup of coffee, and I let myself really feel everything I'd been holding back. The grief of growing up unloved by the people who should have loved me most. The anger at all the missed moments, the forgotten birthdays, the dismissive comments. The pain of watching my sister receive everything I desperately wanted while being made to feel greedy for wanting it at all. And underneath all of that, something I hadn't expected to find: relief. Relief that I'd finally stopped pretending. Relief that I'd finally told the truth, even if I'd told it in the most dramatic way possible. Relief that I'd stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. People ask me if I regret it. Family members, the few who still talk to me, ask if maybe it was too much, if maybe I should have just talked to them privately. And I tell them what I'm telling you now. I tried talking. For 32 years, I tried talking. I tried being good enough. I tried earning their love. I tried communicating my hurt in quiet, acceptable ways. And none of it worked. They didn't hear me when I was polite. So I made them hear me the only way I knew how. Was it painful? Yes. Was it public? Absolutely. Was it exactly as humiliating and devastating for them as being excluded from their anniversary party was for me? I hope so. I really, really hope so. Because here's what I learned through all of this. Sometimes family won't see your worth until it's displayed in their shame. Sometimes the people who hurt you most will never apologize unless they're forced to face what they've done. And sometimes forgiveness isn't about reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the need for them to change, to acknowledge, to love you the way you deserved all along. I forgave myself for not being the daughter they wanted. I forgave myself for all the years I spent believing their assessment of me. I forgave myself for hoping they'd change. But forgive them? Forget what they did? Go back to pretending we're a happy family? No. That's not healing, that's just more silence. And I'm done being silent. I've started therapy since all this happened. My therapist asked me what I wanted from my parents, and I realized I didn't want anything anymore. For so long, I wanted their approval, their love, their recognition. But now, I just want peace. I want to build a life where my worth isn't determined by whether two people who share my DNA decide I'm valuable. I want to create my own family. Chosen family. People who see me and celebrate me and show up for me. I want to stop carrying their rejection like it's something I earned, something I deserved, because I didn't. I was a child who needed love, and I had parents who couldn't or wouldn't give it. That's their failure, not mine. My sister and I don't talk anymore. She's made her choice and it's not me, which honestly isn't surprising. She's always chosen them, always been on their side, because being on their side meant being in their favor. I understand it even if it hurts. When you're the golden child, you don't want to look too closely at how the system works because you benefit from it. Examining their treatment of me would mean examining her own complicity in it, and that's uncomfortable. It's easier to paint me as the villain, the jealous sister who went too far, than to acknowledge that she stood by while I was erased over and over again. My extended family is split. Some people reached out privately to say they understood, that they'd witnessed the dynamic for years and always felt uncomfortable about it, but didn't know what to say. Others have completely cut me off, sending messages about how family should be sacred and private, and how I broke some unspoken code by exposing dysfunction publicly. To those people I say, the code was already broken. It broke every time my parents chose to diminish me. It broke every time I was excluded and lied to. I didn't break our family. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. I moved recently. New apartment, different neighborhood, a fresh start. I took down all the family photos. I don't display pictures of people who made me feel like I didn't deserve to be in the frame. Instead, my walls have photos of friends, of places I've traveled, of moments where I felt genuinely happy and seen. I'm building something new, something that isn't defined by their absence or their approval. And slowly, so slowly, I'm learning what it feels like to take up space without apologizing for it. The silence from my parents continues. Part of me thought that maybe, eventually, they'd reach out with a real apology. That maybe seeing their behavior reflected back at them so starkly would trigger some kind of reckoning, some moment of clarity where they'd realize what they'd done and want to make amends. But months have passed and there's been nothing. And I've realized that's okay. I don't need their apology to move forward. I don't need their acknowledgement to validate my pain. I lived it. I know it was real. And that's enough. What I did that night, sending that video, it wasn't just revenge. I mean, yes, it was revenge. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't satisfying to make them uncomfortable, to make them face consequences for once in their lives. But it was also liberation. It was me finally refusing to carry their shame anymore. It was me saying out loud, in front of everyone, that I existed, that I mattered, that my pain was real and valid and not something I had to quietly swallow anymore. It was the moment I stopped being the forgotten daughter and became someone who refused to be forgotten. Do I wish things had been different? Of course! I wish I'd had parents who loved me the way I needed to be loved. I wish I'd grown up feeling valued and seen and celebrated. I wish I had a sister who was also a friend, an ally, instead of a competitor I always lost to. I wish I had a family I could call on holidays without feeling like I'm bothering them. But wishing doesn't change reality. And the reality is that some parents fail their children. Some families are toxic. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is acknowledge that truth and walk away. For the first time in my life, the silence doesn't hurt. It used to be deafening, that silence from them, that lack of calls and texts and interest in my life. It used to feel like proof that I was unlovable, unwanted, not enough. But now it feels like peace. It feels like freedom. It feels like I'm finally free from the cycle of hoping and being disappointed, of reaching out and being rejected, of trying to earn something that was never going to be freely given. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's full of possibility. It's full of space for me to figure out who I am without their voices in my head telling me who I should be. I'm sharing this story not because I think everyone should do what I did. Public confrontation isn't always the answer, and it's not always safe or healthy. But I'm sharing it because I know there are others out there who understand this specific pain. The pain of being the child who wasn't chosen. The one who was always on the outside of their own family. The one who tried everything and still wasn't enough. If that's you, if you're watching this and seeing yourself in my story, I want you to know something. It's not your fault. You didn't deserve that treatment. You were worthy of love and attention and celebration, and the fact that your family couldn't see that says everything about them and nothing about you. You don't have to confront them the way I did. You don't have to make a scene or burn bridges or create a dramatic moment of reckoning. But you also don't have to keep accepting crumbs and calling it love. You don't have to keep showing up for people who refuse to show up for you. You don't have to keep hoping they'll change, keep giving them chances to hurt you, keep making yourself smaller so they can stay comfortable in their dysfunction. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to build a life that doesn't include them, and that choice doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who finally learned that you deserve better. My name is Taryn. I'm 32 years old, and I wasn't invited to my own parents' 40th anniversary party, so I made sure they'd never forget my absence. And I'd do it again. Not because I'm vindictive or cruel, though I'm sure that's how they framed it to anyone who'll listen. But because I refuse to be erased anymore. I refuse to be quiet about my pain just to make them comfortable. I refuse to protect people who never protected me. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to love you, you're not alone. I see you. Your story matters. Your pain is valid. And you deserve to be seen, truly seen, for exactly who you are. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me where you're watching from. Let's be visible together. Let's refuse to be forgotten. Let's stop apologizing for taking up space in a world that's always tried to make us smaller. Because we matter. We've always mattered. And it's time we started believing that, with or without their approval.